Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Center for Practice Excellence Speaker Series. My name is Zubin Austin, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session. I will turn it over to Annalise Mathers, who will introduce our speakers, our discussant, and our topic for today. But let me first thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to an interactive and very interesting discussion. Over to you, Annalise.
Thanks so much, Zubin, and welcome to everyone trickling in online. I can see we have quite a few, which is really nice for today's presentation and discussion. So as Zubin mentioned, we'll begin with a presentation from Dr. David Gardner and Dr. Andrea Murphy, and then move to some remarks from our discussant for today, which is Vanita Aurora. And then we'll open it up as usual to general question and answer from the audience. So for everyone in our audience today, please feel free to unmute, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box at any time during the presentation, and then I will just moderate those at the end of Vanita's remarks. So our presenters for today, I'd like to introduce are Dr. David Gardner and Dr. Andrea Murphy. Dr. Murphy is an associate professor at the College of Pharmacy in Dalhousie, so they're joining us from the East Coast today. And Dr. Gardner is a professor with the Department of Psychiatry also at Dalhousie. The research program that these two are leading centers on the role of the community pharmacist in the care of people living with mental illness and addictions. They co-developed and implemented the Bloom program in Nova Scotia, and that's the program that they'll be speaking about today with us. So please welcome me in joining David and Andrea, and excited to hear about the Bloom program. Thank you.
All right, we'll just go ahead here and share our screen.
All right, share.
Okay, so can someone give us a sign you can see that just to make sure?
Yep, all good.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thanks so much everyone for joining us today. You know, to use an overused phrase, but during these unprecedented times, it's nice to see that some folks could come out today. I see a couple of familiar names there. So David and I are going to give you a quick tour about the Bloom program, and some of you may be familiar with this program from either reading some stuff or some of the exchanges that we've had. But before we get into that, I would just like to acknowledge, and as Annalise said, we're on the East Coast here. We work at Dalhousie, and Dalhousie is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we are part of the Peace and Friendship Treaties, and we are all treaty people. So in terms of our disclosures, I guess really the thing that's pertinent for today's presentation is we have been working in this area for a while, and we're original co-developers of the Bloom program. And more recently, we've had funding from the government of New Brunswick for a project. The Bloom program itself did have a substantial amount of its implementation money funded through the government of Nova Scotia through their mental illness and addiction strategy. So that's important to note that the funding did also originally come from government monies. So ultimately today, what we're hoping to do is describe the Bloom program for you. We're going to talk a little bit about how it started, its design, some of the reimbursement features of the program itself, some of our lessons learned, and hopefully at the end, you know, people might have some questions or want to discuss a few features. Obviously, I think David and I, you know, we can talk all day about these things anyway, but I think the Bloom program is one of those things where we did learn so many lessons that we'd be more than happy to chat both online and offline with folks if they have questions. So obviously Bloom program is, as you probably gleaned from the introduction, we work in mental illness and substance use disorders in terms of our program of research. And this program was really geared toward community pharmacists and improving the care of folks living with mental illness and substance use disorders within communities in Nova Scotia. It was also a program that was intended to help pharmacists focus not only solely on a person's mental health concerns, but also then to consider the physical ramifications as well that people might have been experiencing and issues with potential comorbidities. Realistically, though, we wanted the pharmacists to isolate and hone in on medication-related issues as a mechanism for identifying potential people that would benefit from the program.
And I would just add, some people like to think of it as a chronic disease management program. And I think it does fit that model to some degree, but it really does focus on the whole individual as opposed to a single chronic disease.
I think one of the important things about the Bloom program for us, and some of the things that we've learned over time, is around some of its what we would like to call novel and unique features. I think one of the key things when you're thinking about maybe an integrated knowledge translation approach to program evaluation and program development, or thinking about implementation science, I think really having connections to various key stakeholders and community members is really critical. So for us, one of the things that was really important was having long-standing relationships, not just inside the context of research, but also outside in terms of relationships with community members. So I think the next slide just shows that for us, we really took our time in thinking about who are the different stakeholders and partners. And some of that information for us, we learned from thinking about, reading some of the earlier reports. For example, looking at the Kirby report, looking at Out of the Shadows of Last and Out of the Shadows at Last, and thinking about who are all the key members that are impacted by mental illness and addictions care or substance use care. And what are some of the meaningful messaging that we can get from some of these reports. And so really, when you look at a lot of these different reports that have been written over the years, they all start to boil down some common key themes around gaps in care. Over there, we've written some things around, how psychiatric medications are often viewed as this double-edged sword. They require persistence, there's risk for harm, there's non-adherence, there's stigma, they're costly. So you'll see snippets come out in reports that talk about issues with medications and care, or just care in general. And obviously there's an enormous amount of disconnect that can be experienced by people who live with mental illness in communities. And so that was one of the things that we were gleaning from these reports and from working with connections and communities to say what is needed and what can we help community pharmacists to do.
And I can just add, with the Come Together report, which came out for Nova Scotia as part of its mental health and addiction strategy, there was 60 some recommendations, and we mapped those recommendations to what pharmacy services might be able to help with. And there was around 25 of those recommendations that were salient and relevant to pharmacy services themselves.
And just to add on to that and thinking about that reporting, we also reviewed that information as well with our local association, so the Pharmacy Association of Nova Scotia, because obviously when you're thinking about program development and implementation, having various key players and partners on board with these types of things is pretty critical. So they were obviously aware and doing similar things about thinking about how can pharmacists look at these reports and capitalize on these opportunities. So again, the idea of the Bloom program, as many folks out there who work in any kind of program development and implementation, it doesn't really just develop overnight. So we have been working, I think, with various community pharmacies and pharmacists, just, kind of over time and over the history of having connections within the province. And I think probably over 10 to 15 years had tried to develop different programs. This is one that I won't speak to, but it was just more than meds. And it was different things that we tried to establish, thinking about different models of getting pharmacists engaged with community in different ways to say, hey, we are a key player in mental health care as well. And really trying to support more of a ground level grassroots support for the pharmacist role with patients and with clients. Another thing that we think is really important, and it's really been obviously a heck of a lot harder with COVID, but is getting out and supporting various organizations. So one of the things that we would do often is fundraise and support and work with local groups, such as the Schizophrenia Society of Nova Scotia. And so David was a big champion in terms of helping to fundraise for that organization every year, and it's a not-for-profit. And one of the key things within that, what we learned is that those relationships over time, when you're supporting people and not really expecting much in return, But folks from those groups and organizations, when you're actually trying to develop something, come out and say, hey, this is something that we would like to help support you in because we have this shared common goal and shared common value, and we would like to participate in help putting forward an agenda that would support more pharmacist engagement and care because we think it's important as well. So it is nice that that reciprocity does exist, and you really do, as a pharmacist and a researcher, have to put yourself out there and be involved with community organizations.
And I'll just point out, everybody wearing a white t-shirt that you can see in these photos is a pharmacy student. So it was a really great way to engage undergraduate pharmacists and those who have recently graduated to join us in the fundraising efforts. So this has been something we've been doing for quite a long time. So I'm just going to move on to thinking about the program itself. So now we've looked at a few unique features about how it originated and how you build community support in an authentic way, and talk about what about the program itself. And so looking to the right side of the slide, you can see there's a number of different features, if you will, that would be, in my mind, potentially considered unique. So I'll talk a little bit about the pharmacy application to offer the Bloom program, and then what the program actually is and the funding model and so forth. So we'll go through that relatively quickly. So you don't just say, I'd like to offer the program and be able to offer it. It's actually quite an investment to be able to offer it in terms of time and effort for a community pharmacy. I've updated this to represent how it's done now. So those pharmacies will submit a letter of interest and be invited to participate in the next round of training. And so they do that online. And then after that, they go off and do sort of their homework. So they do a complete and comprehensive local environmental scan, identifying what kind of mental health and addictions services there are, what kind of organizations are in their neighborhood or their community or town, if you will, what kind of support groups and resources are available to individuals. And they're asked to also make links with those services and organizations and support groups. So the professional links and the environmental scan kind of go hand in hand. They also want to reach out to local prescribers and healthcare teams, primary care, specialized care, to indicate that they're interested in going forward with a Bloom program application. They'll need to display some print materials, improve their local library in their pharmacy that's available to the public themselves in terms of mental health resources. And this goes along with the local environmental scan by connecting with those individuals and bringing in pamphlets, for example, and resources that were given to them. And then establish policies within their pharmacy of how they will run the program itself and train the pharmacy team. Then they'll do their second round of training, submit their application. They may be asked to improve their application in some areas before it's actually approved. So that in and of itself is quite different. And this is just an example of one of the pharmacists in her pharmacy showing off the signage. So people, when they come in, they know it's a Bloom pharmacy. They can read about what is a Bloom pharmacy and what it offers. And then in terms of the patients themselves who come into it, patients are actually enrolled into the Bloom program. So it's a sit-down meeting with the individual patient to tell them about what the program is, what it would offer them, and what they should expect to get out of it. To be eligible for the program, you basically have to have a DSM-5 psychiatric disorder that you self-identify and share with the pharmacist, as well as having a medication-related issue. So on the right side is the medication therapy issues that are all very familiar to us. If you have any of those, along with having some form of mental illness for which medications are being used, you would likely be eligible for it. But we do have an agreement with government that there are higher priority diagnoses compared to some lower priority diagnoses. So when we did our pilot study, these data were pulled from the pilot study, and just to show you who was involved as patients or participants in the study itself. So the majority of them had anxiety and mood disorders. There was concomitant physical health disorder concerns in half of the patients, if not more, and then a whole list of other illnesses, psychiatric illnesses, if you will, that are relatively commonplace in a community pharmacy. So it's not a targeted program for people with depression or for people with psychotic illnesses. It's for people who live with mental illness and or addictions problems. And it's really focusing on what are their health priorities. Why did people come into the program? This again is from our pilot study. The main reason people were interested in joining is to get help to improve their pharmacotherapy so their symptoms and day-to-day functioning get better. The lowest rate was for inappropriate therapy, but also quite low was non-adherence. And sometimes people think the pharmacy and the pharmacist is a good option for helping with non-adherence. I think that's the healthcare providers that tend to think pharmacies are useful for non-adherence. This program really was more focused on helping people improve their pharmacotherapy to help them, whether it's managing adverse effects, helping to stop medication, or to improve symptom and functioning management. So how did it work? Well, there was enrollment, which led towards an initial assessment. Really, that required an appointment as it was substantial. Now it could happen over several shorter appointments, but there was forms to fill out, if you will, and there still are, to ensure that you've done a relatively complete assessment of the individual. And during that process, you will identify what are the patient's priorities, health priorities, medication-related priorities, and then you'll get going. You will have follow-up meetings with them based on their needs. And after 6 months, hopefully you've addressed the initial problems as well as any new problems that have come along. But just as we put in the application and as we talk about it with other people, you don't tend to solve issues with psychopharmacological agents overnight. It doesn't tend to be a single discussion and the individual goes off and solves these kind of problems. Often it's multiple meetings with multiple trials, trying different things. And that's why we defaulted to having a 6-month follow-up. And then another factor that's quite unique is you get discharged, and sometimes we call it graduated from the Bloom program. A lot of people are actually quite reluctant. They really appreciate being in the Bloom program. But we do ask people to work together to solve problems so that you're not just staying in the program, but you're actually doing well enough to leave the program itself. So what happens to people when they're in the program? So medication management happened at almost 75% of patient encounters, and that can be by telephone or it could be an in-person visit. But there's a lot of other things that we identified from looking at the charting by the pharmacists who offered the program itself. And you can see, mathematically, you could argue that 1 in 4 encounters, the pharmacists are providing care in between medication management activities that don't directly relate to the medication management activities. It may be social support. It may be some focus on education around health, illness. It may be to do with self-care and encouraging individuals to take advantage of local resources for self-care and so on. And in some cases, it was triage to higher levels of care in a more urgent manner. What are the fees? So this was initially a pilot study, and we wanted to see if a different kind of fee structure would work. So each person across the province who has a health card is eligible for the study as long as there's a pharmacy that's close to them and maybe they're already going to it. And what they would expect to get is sort of written on the side there at the bottom. What the pharmacy will be offering is the pharmacy staff will be working at their full scope of practice to identify and prioritize the individual's health and medication needs and work collaboratively with the patient and their healthcare team to address them, adjusting the time that you spent and the frequency that you see the patient based on their needs. Now, I hope when you read that, you think, well, that's what pharmacies are supposed to do. And pharmacists are supposed to be able to provide. So this is really a program to help structure good clinical care and patient support in the community pharmacy itself. The fee is $75 per month of care provided per patient with a maximum of 6 fees. It didn't have to be 6 consecutive fees. So essentially the return would be $450 paid by the Department of Health and Wellness in Nova Scotia for 6 months of Bloom program service per patient. It didn't impact dispensing fees, and it did not allow for some services, for example, medication reviews. If the person had ongoing medication related issues, the pharmacist could apply to have the patient stay in the program for another 6 months, and that would be referred to as an extension, where the fee would be reduced to $30 per month per patient for the extension. So we did the pilot project, started in 2014 to 2016, and this is the distribution of programs currently. There will be a new round of training for new pharmacies to come on board. So this will change over time, but you can see where we have pharmacies offering the program and where there may be some areas for new pharmacies to come on board.
Mhm. So we'll just quickly go through some of the key findings. So these relate to the implementation project itself, or what David was referring to, the pilot project. And, you know, we were not surprised to see that pharmacists did work with clients to resolve their, if you want to say, DDPs or their DRPs. So the goals that they had originally set out to try to make better with their medication issues, and they were primarily in the majority resolved. Also, another thing that we were pleasantly surprised to see was the positive feedback around access and helping folks to navigate the system. And a lot of that was through the pharmacists also going out and doing their homework and figuring out who lives in their community. So that was really good to see that the application package itself did help to translate into helping people to access services. I think another thing that we discovered was that a lot of the pharmacists said, you know, it's better to use a team-based approach, and you also have to be flexible. Some folks offered appointment-based services, and other folks just did on-demand. And that was something there where the flexibility was necessary. And some people would say, you know, on a slow evening, I would say, okay, let's set up the majority of my Bloom calls, and I'll actually see if I can contact some folks and do it that way. Another thing that was really important for us, and given the geographic dispersion of Nova Scotians, and surely in Ontario and other parts of Canada, there's, you know, huge geographic areas that need to be covered. And so in folks with rural areas with fewer services, you know, that pharmacists filling gaps and voids to be some of the terminology that patients would use in terms of saying, like, there was a real big gap in my care. Now they were able to actually access somebody. And that's similar in number 5, there was an alternative care option. And a lot of people, as you might expect, had different expectations now of their pharmacist with being involved in the Bloom program. And, you know, similar to a lot of other research out there, a lot of folks saying, like, I didn't really know that my pharmacist was capable of this. And now I know I have them in my corner and they're a champion for me. I think, you know, the fact that both physicians and pharmacists also did acknowledge that they needed to communicate probably better and collaborate more. You know, we had an example of where a patient was not able to be found, so to speak, by their GP, and, you know, called the pharmacist within the circle of care saying, like, I haven't seen this person, I'm really, really worried about them. And the pharmacist was actually able to say, oh, I can get them to touch base with you because I have had contact. So it's just small, important pieces like that, which, you know, maybe in the end we're preventing things like hospitalizations or folks from, you know, getting completely disconnected with care. I think the other thing that patients did appreciate was having that in-house self-care resources that pharmacists were also able to provide, and also to, I guess, increase the knowledge of the pharmacists and then communicating back with other healthcare professionals. So that was another important part of the program. And I think another thing that we learned, and probably not surprising to folks on the call, is that when people perceive that there's maybe gaps or disparities in care, obviously another program that comes along to help empower folks will, you know, enable them to strongly endorse it and view it positively because of the quality of care that they did receive and the perception that gaps were being filled for them. I'm not going to spend, a ton of time on the bumps and challenges on the road. We probably could have done like a SWOT analysis up here and talked about all the different things if you're thinking about pharmacy business planning. But definitely no good deed goes unpunished is up there in kind of the faint, finer print. I think that, there were a lot of things that we learned along the way. You probably understand that there are forces that be and there are the key players. But the flow of power and control can sometimes shift and turn, and it can be highly dependent on so many different things. Like, for example, a political agenda that's occurring at the time, concurrent contract negotiations that are happening. So I think the potential, threats that do exist to, if somebody was to go forward and do a business plan, if you will, such as this type of service, you could potentially say, oh, yes, I see these things, and you can list them off. But I don't think until really you're in it trying to win it, that you do see the extent and the breadth of the things that you have to be aware of. I do think that reimbursement is one of those things, whenever money is involved, folks really start to perk up and start to debate reimbursement models, which is critically important because obviously, I think with different pressures that different pharmacies are experiencing, they would certainly be concerned or wondering about what the reimbursement model is going to look like. So that's important to have many stakeholder input on that. And hopefully with the future of the program as it's expanding, and we've just had word from government that through our Bloom program coordinator with the province, that it will be, permanent funded program from now on in. So hopefully there'll be an opportunity to do some more longitudinal and pharmacoeconomic and economic analyses on that. I think internally, overall, I think, we can look back on it. Maybe now you kind of don't realize the challenges as much or as, I guess, severe as they felt at the time. But right now, I think, pharmacists at the time, it was something new, it was something different. Workflow, if you're implementing something new, it's always going to be a challenge to figure out the right way to do it. And I think if you have different operations with different stores, and often no two stores are alike. So really, Dr. Laura Miller, who's the current Bloom coordinator, is continuing on with site visits, when able to, especially during COVID, but to go in and talk to people about, how you're doing a workflow and doing quality assurance check-ins and whatnot. And I think as much as we espouse that we do documentation, I think that is something that everybody is continuing to work on. And I know depending on your system, so if you have Kroll or whatever you're using, folks are using different mechanisms to document. And we actually were still using paper-based documentation just because no two systems were alike. Our share doesn't currently talk to all pharmacies in the way that you would want it to for pharmacy-based documentation. So I'm sure everyone out there is probably going, yes, Andrea, you can stop talking now. We understand the problems with IT implementation. So unfortunately for now it's paper-based, but hopefully that will be a goal, is to move it over to fully electronic. And some people do scan them right into their system in terms of their documentation.
I think it might be worthwhile saying what's not there, which is competency. And I think it was really important at the start. Some people said, I don't know if I can do this, offer this service, because I feel like I would need to know more. And we provided pretty fervent reassurance that they know all they need to know because they work closely with these patients on a daily basis. And it was really about providing support and the care that they regularly provide. So that turned out not to be an issue. There was no necessary upgrading required for the pharmacists across the board.
Yeah, and just one last challenge that I want to speak to is something that as the program, kind of we launch, and it's kind of now we're taking our, adult child out of the basement and launching them into the world. For launching the Bloom program, we realized 2 researchers from Dalhousie can't support a program long-term. So I have been talking about Dr. Laura Miller, who's our Bloom program coordinator. So David and I worked with basically our intellectual property department at Dalhousie, and effectively what we do is license the program in its current design to Nova Scotia Health, and Nova Scotia Health actually delivers the program or does the operations for the program. and Nova Scotia government. So it's actually billed through Medivie. So it's all electronic billing. So that's just some other things that you kind of have to think about is, well, where is this program going to sit? Who owns it, etc. So lastly, from the thinking about the, good implications, I guess, is, an unintended but excellent consequence or benefit of having the Bloom program is that during COVID for pharmacists, and we did submit a paper to CPJ, just a short brief report, but we did a quick survey using REDCap to our Bloom program pharmacies. And I didn't bother putting in some of the statistics since it's under review, but just a couple of the quotes there. And really, if I could just stress the fact that having a program in place, and I think we all know with behavior change is once you adopt a behavior and you start doing it, it gets easier and easier to do. So many of the comments that we received were the pharmacists were just engaging in Bloom-like discussions, whether or not patients were part of the Bloom program or not, and recognizing that there were needs in the community and figuring out when people needed help or when there was something maybe not quite right. So I think, I'm probably reading a little into the comments, but I think for the most part, people were quite satisfied that having the Bloom program was an enabler and allowing them to offer help when needed, especially in such a challenging time.
So I'm just going to reiterate a few things. Going back to, I would say, the early 2000s, maybe a little further back, we've been involved in mental health and addictions research, bringing together the community pharmacy, as well as outreach support in a variety of different ways, if you will. And the funding call came up in 2012 after we had done a number of things that gave us the opportunity to apply. And in the end, I had a very exciting jump and scream in my office when we learned that we got the Bloom program funded back in 2014. We conducted our pilot project, the implementation study itself, and the report was submitted and we presented it to the Director of Mental Health Services, Mental Health and Addiction Services for the province, and it went over well. So then it was, as Andrea said, where do you go from there? The research is done. How do you actually implement it now to become a program? And that took a while. So in 2018, Dalhousie and the Health Authority finally were able to mete out a document and an agreement. And then we were able to hire a program coordinator, and sort of the rest is history as the program has undergone some expansion. I think this is the third, possibly the fourth round of bringing in new pharmacies since it went from a pilot project in the past. So since 2014, pharmacies have been offering the Bloom program to patients. Some pharmacies have dropped out, and new pharmacies and more new pharmacies are coming on board. We did have some good luck. We had the Honorable Dr. Jane Philpott, when she was the Federal Minister of Health, doing a kind of across Canada look for new prototype kind of programs in mental health and addictions. And our government happened to point out the new Bloom program. And so we got to meet with her and talk to her about the program itself. So that helped to bolster the program within the local provincial government, if you will. And we're just going to leave you with this as one way to give you a feeling of the program itself.
People will see their pharmacist 10 times more often than they'll see their primary care provider.
But not everybody realizes what the pharmacist can do for them. So the Bloom program is an initiative by pharmacists
to help with mental illness and addiction in our communities in Nova Scotia. Many people will avoid seeking care for mental health problems.
You want to have somebody that you can go to and get questions addressed as quickly as possible.
We're able to really sit
in a private space
and discuss different issues.
Identify what your health needs are, what your medication issues are.
Medications are a critical part to recovery.
But half of the things pharmacists are doing are not directly related to medication management.
The biggest thing is support. Community pharmacists are there to listen. I feel great about the program.
I do too.
Yeah.
People come back saying, I'm so glad I have my pharmacist there. It's more than meds.
It's people, not pills. I'm Andrea Murphy.
And I'm David Gardner.
We're trying to help people get access to the mental health care that they need.
And I should point out, that 1-minute video was created by a group independent of us. They approached us, government was asking them to highlight, to make videos of different health services across the provinces at the time. And so somehow they identified the Bloom program as one. So we really had nothing to do other than sit for 2 to 3 hours and be interviewed. And then they pulled it all together and showed us the final product. And that's what we just shared with you. So that's what we have for you to hopefully stimulate some discussion about pharmacy services as they exist today, what the Bloom program offers, what it does a little bit differently, what it can do to inspire, or what might be something that we would go in a different direction with as we've learned these things. So I'll hand it back to you and we'll open it up for discussion, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, David and Andrea. I feel like you covered absolutely everything in that presentation with some background, some stats, some testimonials, and then that beautiful video to finish off. So thank you so much for that. We are going to pass it over now to our discussant for today, Vanita Aurora, and then we will go right into audience question and answer after that. So for everyone online, please feel free at any time to type your questions into the chat box and I'll get to them after Vanita's remarks. So Vanita is an associate professor in the teaching stream at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy here at the University of Toronto. And she's also currently a clinical pharmacist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. She's taught in the undergraduate pharmacy program, the PharmD for Pharmacists program, and also other departments, including the Faculty of Medicine. Finally, her professional background has included working at a number of hospitals in Ontario, as well as community pharmacies. So very well positioned, and welcome, Vanita. Look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Annalise, and thanks for having me here. David and Andrea, I have to concur with Annalise. That was a very holistic, I guess, treatment or presentation to your holistic approach to this, the Bloom program. I really appreciate that you were very frank in identifying the challenges, some of them not unanticipated, the financial one being the obvious one for me that struck out, but also the advantages, being able to cover a lot of ground, and Canada has a lot of ground to cover. So the benefits in being able to reach so many people across the country, the potential to me is quite huge. You did a nice, I think, job of really knocking down the barriers. I actually read some of this stuff ahead of time, the paperwork that you have published, and every barrier I could come up with, you had it addressed. It came out, it was small numbers, but it came out in the themes of your publications, in those 10 themes. So the financial model notwithstanding is always a challenge for pharmacy practitioners. I wanted to touch on something that David brought up at the end. David, you mentioned the word competency. And I'm going to add confidence to that. I was thinking about, we were mentioning training, that pharmacies were encouraged to make those community resources and connections, and then to have some literature and resources available. And I would argue that I think we already do that. I think we have the competency. I just think pharmacists may not have the confidence. And of course, there's that whole reimbursement piece and how to incentivize pharmacists and find the time to do this wonderful work. But I'm just wondering, people in general, and especially in this pandemic, they just want to be heard. They want someone to talk to. And the greatest gift we can give anybody, including our patients, is our time. And so I'm just wondering, we need to take advantage of this opportunity. If we give them our time as an expert and actually listen to patients and talk to them, you've just already proven with your research the benefits that can come out of that. So I'm wondering, you know, this is going to be a bit of wild thought here, but in this pandemic, are we missing an opportunity? Patients, us, everybody in the world is very, very stressed right now. Is this a chance that we can actually shine and really embrace our full scope? Pharmacists are out there every day, broadening their scope and exercising it to its fullest capacity. But is there another opportunity here, and can we actually make it work? So I'm just very interested to hear how the participants here, if they have any thoughts on how we can bring it into play in a province like Ontario, what kind of ideas there are to incentivize the pharmacists who are already feeling quite taxed with all the pandemic implications of their work. But we're 24 hours available. I just find that you will not be able to for the most part, consult another healthcare provider 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You cannot talk to an accountant or a lawyer and have their attention and really receive instantaneous and fulsome and trusted advice. But you can do that with a pharmacist. We are the rock stars of the healthcare team. We're front and center. I'm just interested to see how we can leverage that trust and leverage that accessibility to bring something like this into Ontario. So I'm not sure if anybody had any ideas or questions.
I think that's a fantastic question, Vanita. I'd maybe pass it back quickly to David and Andrea if you have any words of wisdom or, yeah, I think it kind of ties into, you know, best practices, lessons learned. If you have any key seeds of wisdom that you'd like to pass along, and then anyone in the audience, feel free to type into the chat box, or I think we even have a small enough group if someone wants to unmute, maybe raise their hand on Zoom and unmute.
Yeah, I think, you know, I can start. And one of the biggest things that I would say is obviously, you know, having history, having credibility. You know, David, more than he has a long-standing career in mental health and has a significant amount of credibility and does a lot of presentations with community groups. So is really well connected in academia, you know, being with the Department of Psychiatry, and had a lot of psychiatrists and specialists, you know, from that angle supporting this type of program. So I think, you know, you often want to say, like, does it really come down to the person? And you often think about leadership qualities. Like, is it about an individual, or is it about, you know, the role that the individual is in? And I probably kind of go back and say it's a mixture of both. Because I tend to, it's funny because we were co-developing this, and I tend to be a bit more conservative and always not necessarily wanting to ruffle feathers. Whereas I think you need somebody like David on your team if you're going to implement something that says, no, we really just need to do this. This is the time, it's the right time. So, and that's in that planning piece. So I think having, you know, a collective or a group of people, we actually had a steering committee as part of our Bloom program as well. So that's another thing to think about. And I think obviously if you're going to do anything in a big province like Ontario, you know, thinking about both your regulator and your association, and, you know, thinking about what are the political strategic directions that are happening right now, right? Both within your association, what are they advocating for? Where is your college going? But also what are the, you know, and it's really hard in COVID, I think it's almost really impossible for people to kind of give extra resources to kind of other things right now. But I think, Vanita, you're right. There is also an opportunity to really think about mental health care during this time of COVID, because it's quite very stressful and taxing for a lot of people. And that's an understatement. So I think it's really kind of knowing who the players are, the key players in that mix, about you know, who are the really big decision makers here and who are really going to make or break something if you put it forward. And I think for us, you know, knowing what directions people were moving in, I feel like it was just almost like a perfect storm of things just working out at a really good time. So I think that you have to look at the timing and think about what are the advantages and opportunities that you can take advantage of at this time, and assemble your team and start thinking about planning, and kind of maybe pulling someone up to say who can be the person that could have the leadership role on it, someone who's connected and, you know, really able to advocate for a program such as something like this. That was really long-winded, sorry.
I was going to say that in the participant list, I actually see a number of, I think, very well-skilled and experienced people in the mental health arena. I think the key players are probably here at the table. So I'm just wondering if is there opportunities for province to province collaboration? Since we don't have a Gardner Murphy team here in Ontario, how does one get started? How do we motivate our pharmacists, or how do we find that team, or how do we collaborate? Is it just somebody having the nerve to actually do it and saying, here's an opportunity? There's never going to be a perfect time, so the perfect time is now.
What do other folks on the call think. I mean, we're always happy to partner and work with people, like if there was grant funding or some other type of opportunity, for sure. You know, I'm not sure if folks on the call know the lay of the land there with respect to what's happening.
Has there actually been any kind of have you shared your work in an official way with any other jurisdictions? Are there Bloom trained pharmacists outside of Nova Scotia?
I think we get a lot of emails from pharmacists like Saskatchewan. I think we've had emails from people in Ontario. So different provincial individual pharmacists will reach out to us. And it's one of those things where you kind of say, of course, you could try to implement a Bloom-like program, but to actually have an infrastructure in place where, you know, for us, having a program structure around Bloom allowed it to be something that had rigor and, you know, likely have sustainability behind it. If we've kind of felt like one-off individual pharmacists who may be passionate about it can definitely do Bloom-like things, but if you want to have a compensation model behind it, if you want to do some evaluation around it, you really need a core group of folks that are going to be able to have that expertise. And then if you want to go down the road of seeking compensation, then, you know, it goes back to thinking about, well, how are these agreements negotiated in your province with government? Like for here, we know really well how it works, but it might work quite differently in Ontario. And I think when you think about all those negotiations and those contractual agreements, that's something that would be higher level that, you know, from individual community pharmacists, really, it wouldn't be something that would be within their, I think, repertoire, I guess, of responsibilities, if you will. So, and I know you know that, Zubin. It's just kind of, you know, so far it's been more about individual uptake and not people coming from, say, a government level asking.
I guess sort of a second. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
No, go ahead, Zubin. You do your follow-up. I was going to change the topic.
I was curious as to whether or not any of the training components have actually been integrated into Dow's pharmacy degree program. That over and above sort of a certification and compensation, there's just good quality material that should be part of a pharmacist's training. That, you know, mental health hasn't necessarily been the strongest part of pharmacy degrees in the past. Have you found a way of sort of reverse engineering this content into your degree program so that newer graduates, or even if they're not Bloom certified, at least have additional skills and confidence?
It's a really interesting question, Zub. And I know, you know, it's one of these things because Dalhousie is quite small, right, in terms of our faculty. I've actually used the Bloom program to demonstrate certain things in the past in one of our fourth year courses about business planning, you know, and thinking about using, so we tried to use the behavior change wheel and different theories to kind of structure the development and implementation of the program. So we try to use it almost as an example in many different ways of doing and teaching things. And obviously, you know, David has taught in the CNS curriculum for many, many years, and probably, you know, in our problem-based learning environment, you know, we are hoping that, you know, and I can't speak for you, but I think you're hoping that they're doing a lot of their therapeutic content within their PBL groups, but that more when you're spending your individual faculty time with them, you're really talking about the lived experience and the things that community pharmacy should be doing in terms of role development. And that, you know, that falls in CNS, but it also does follow a lot into my content areas, which is a social, behavioral, and administrative pharmacy, thinking about professionalism and whatnot, and, you know, continued competency. And I also know that Kim Sponigal, for example, in our labs has been doing standardized patients with folks that live with, you know, psychotic-like illnesses, or they might have suicidal ideation. So we're trying to really, I think, bolster that part of the curriculum, and our new curriculum has a substantial amount more there as well.
Yeah, expanding on the substance use disorders.
Yeah.
Which lets me sort of segue into Beth's question. Yeah. So I'll
Thanks.
segue out and then back into your question, Beth. I just wanted to add, I don't think it was luck, but I think it was really good fortune that we had the opportunity to meet well before the Bloom program idea came along, but it was reasonably well timed to meet with the Minister of Health. You know, I don't know, you know, when I lived in Toronto, I probably never really thought about directly meeting with the Minister of Health too often. But here you might be able to pull it off if you are strong enough and you've got enough people backing you up. So what was really fortunate is we did have the people who were not part of the pharmacy world encouraging these meetings. And so we actually had a former Minister of Health at a cabinet meeting, and somebody from the community sat outside that cabinet meeting for 2 hours waiting to talk to him, to tell him that she needs to meet with me about the Bloom program. And I didn't ask her to do that, but she did that, which, you know, again, so that's kind of what, Lisa, you're bringing up about who are the key stakeholders. You want to increase people's drive, not the pharmacy people, but the people outside of the pharmacy business world and the pharmacy community and clinical world to actually say, we need a Bloom program. So your suggestion for, you know, having a presentation to stakeholders who are not the pharmacy community is an interesting approach. And to go back to your question, Beth, so it's kind of political. It was kind of, you know, at the time, there was a real great focus on mental illness, and there was still quite a good divide between addictions and mental health services. And so the opportunity that was in front of us was to provide a program that was focused on mental illness. Now, over time, it's adapted, so there are changes. So that there's a greater emphasis on supporting people who live with substance use disorders. And because substance use disorders really falls under DSM-5, people can come into the Bloom program without having some other diagnoses. It's very common that they do have a combination, so the comorbidity or the concurrent disorders individuals will be in the program itself. But it didn't start out that way. The person who's now the provincial coordinator is very much an advocate and focused on addictions or substance use disorders. So I could see that evolving over time to include those as priorities as well, listed priorities.
Yeah, Laura Miller's doing a lot of work, I think, to identify the Bloom pharmacist needs in that area as well. And, you know, again, just to pick up on a little piece of the history, when the program was first developed, at first methadone patients, because they were getting daily dispenses, weren't actually allowed in the program because they were concerned with, well, maybe there'll be too much billing overall happening. But, you know, after a while, again, that was another concern that just kind of, you know, went to the wayside because people recognize that methadone is one thing, but then somebody living with comorbid conditions, along with using their opiate replacement therapy, you know, it doesn't make any sense not to let them into the Bloom program. So that criteria, things, you know, it did change over time. And I think with experience, people began to realize the value and the opportunities that were there.
I'd like to just respond to Fang's question. A very good question. So the beauty of the program, sort of the little secret of the program is we are encouraging people who go to a pharmacy. We want that pharmacy to be a part of the Bloom program. We're not asking people to switch pharmacies. We're encouraging pharmacies to offer the program. So then you go into the Bloom program, you really build that strong clinical relationship with the pharmacy team, and then you graduate or discharge from the program. But what happens next week? You go back to that pharmacy where they already know you really well, and they continue to work with you. So if you have no clear, direct medication-related issues to work on, hopefully you will be getting really good clinical care there going forward. But if you partway through your 6 months with the program, you identify new medication-related issues that will take more than the time that you have, then you can ask for an extension and stay in the program itself. So the real magic of the program is people just get to know you really well now that you've been in the program and continue to provide you with excellent care thereafter.
That's great. And thank you for nailing off all the questions in the chat box. You've made my job incredibly easy for this session. I can see Beth has just put in, thanks for the response. Good to hear addictions are subject to even more stigma than other mental health services, for sure. And hopefully pharmacists are open to offering this service. Definitely an important remark there. I had a quick question, and it was sort of about what you were just talking about, David, and also in terms of people graduating from the program. And so I was wondering if you'd considered or thought of, come across any type of scaffolding for a patient support group or patient advocacy group where people, you know, who have graduated from the program can provide insight or be that person to sit outside someone's door and foster a conversation that way.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding what you're imagining. Are you talking about somebody who's graduated from the program to help promote and raise awareness of the program, or to just help people in the community?
Yeah, I could see it from both the pharmacist angle of pharmacists working and reaching out to other pharmacists, but also from the patient perspective. I think patient advocacy is something that has been on our radar here hugely at the Center for Practice Excellence, and also just creating, like Beth has been saying, less of a barrier, less of a stigma to approaching some of these hard conversations from a community perspective.
Yeah, I think that's what happens over time. You know, the people that have gone through the program usually have really good things to say about it, which would encourage others to take advantage of the program. You can imagine back in 2014, when we asked the pharmacists to invite people to enroll, they were saying, I'm inviting you to enroll into a program I have no experience with, and I don't actually know what you're going to get from it. But over time, the pharmacists were much more comfortable saying, I actually think this is going to be really good for you if you're in this program with us. And then over time, I just step back, and when I'm meeting with different groups, I find it really enjoyable to step back, and they'll say, David, don't you know something about the Bloom program? And they may not actually know my history with the Bloom program. They just know about the Bloom program, and maybe I had some connection to it. So the Bloom program is sort of building its own steam, if you will, across different communities, and people are talking about it. And locally, hopefully the pharmacists are being able to say there are support groups. Mm-hmm. And so if you would like to take advantage of this support group or that support group, you know, I know of Tammy, she went to it and she found it to be really good. So to have those kind of personal testimonials really goes a long way in sharing what kind of community supports there are.
Yeah, and just to add, I see Carlo has his hand up there too. Putting up the public resource library, there were pros and cons to that, but it kind of relates back to Beth's question as well, and kind of thinking about what you're getting at about, you know, sharing knowledge and spreading the word and kind of advocating about things, is that really putting yourself out there and saying, hey, we're a Bloom pharmacy. It was almost an anti-stigma intervention in itself, because when folks would walk in and see all these resources available, oh, you know, there was a few books on suicide that folks mm-hmm. had, like a lot of different resources that it's, you know, I think we're getting better with stigma, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and maybe even in some of the smaller communities. And so that was really helpful as part of the intervention for, you know, kind of sharing the knowledge and the having some more anti-stigma type interventions. Yeah.
Definitely. No, thank you for your remarks on that. I'll flip it over to Carlo. Feel free to unmute yourself, and then I think we will have to wind down for today. We're almost at 5 p.m., but yeah, Carlo, I'll turn it to you.
I'll make it really quick. Thanks so much. Andrea and David, just amazing, really wonderful program. And David, I appreciate in the last few slides, how long it's taken to really get to where you are. And, you know, really a labor of love, I'm sure, for both of you. And this is really terrific. I really was struck by your comment, David, about the relationships that you develop with patients. And I think even just from personal experience, that is really sort of, when I think back on my career, it's that ability to develop relationships with patients on an ongoing basis. And I often, when I'm teaching, I often tell students at the faculty, I say, you know, one of the greatest takeaways from, or what I get back from owning the pharmacy and going into, working in the community, is there are families that I know for 3 or 4 generations. Like, and so it's that those families and those people coming back to you on an ongoing basis, one, satisfying in terms of a career, but it's good for business. That's,
Yeah.
and really that's what you're bringing forward. But here's my question. I apologize. I know it's near the end. What are the demographics? What are the demographics of the pharmacists and pharmacies that have sort of engaged in the Bloom program?
Yeah, and you can jump in and I'll just quickly start off. I do like your comments. Our patient or client or, whatever advocate, whatever word we would like to choose there, she actually referred to it as my family pharmacist. And that several years ago was something that wasn't heard very often. So when we were looking at, trying to roll out this to find our family pharmacists out there, right, and say who wants to be involved in this, right away, we had probably the most interest from independents, if you will, so to speak, because they probably had the most flexibility. Now, this goes back to some of those challenges I was talking about earlier. As you know, with corporations, like even something as simple as branding. So, we actually at one point when we had Target, like there was a pharmacist who was really just gung-ho and wanting to do things. And then we realized, okay, there's going to be hiccups here because Bloom has branding, but so does, I'll pick on Target because it's not here anymore. And I feel comfortable to do that.
Yeah.
But let's just insert other names, right? So you have to think about, okay, yeah, so there's branding, there's messaging, there's operations, things have to be done in a certain way. And we get that because procedurally, from that corporation's perspective, this is the way things need to roll out. So I think that we probably had the greatest uptake at first from them. And over time, I think, again, it's one of those people might wait and say, okay, this is your proof of concept. You show us what you can do, and then we'll start to dip our toe in the water. So now over time, we're seeing more Lot and Sobeys, for example, shoppers getting involved. So they are adopting, if you will, the program. So think of, your early adopters. I'm not calling people laggards by any stretch, but it's just taking some time for folks to acclimatize to this type of service and the business model that we have without necessarily yet a really big, robust pharmacoeconomic and health economic analysis. But I think people feel like it definitely is the right thing to do and the right direction to move into. Yeah.
Thank you
so much, Andrea. Thanks, Carlo. And I think just to close it off, Vanita's left a comment. Patients as drivers and stakeholders of the need and benefit of this type of service may be key. So there is both the push and pull concurrently. But just fantastic remarks. Thank you, David and Andrea. Thank you, Vanita, for your comments. Thank you to our entire audience. I think that this was one of our most interactive sessions yet, which is so fantastic. And I hope it really acts as the start of many more conversations between our 2 provinces and then hopefully across Canada as well. So a big thank you to everyone online. Our next CPE event will be June 3rd, and then we'll be taking a short break for the summer. But look forward to hopefully seeing you then, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
And thank you,
All right, well,
Annalise,
thank you.
Vanita, and David, and Andrea. Stay well, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this month's CPE rounds.
Good to see my old friends again. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.